All right, now that we have modified the bases of our walls and columns, now it's time to add some foundation elements. Revit out of the box under the Structure tab, it has an option under the Foundation panel for a wall foundation. So let's just go ahead and explore what we can do with this element. So let's click on Wall Foundation. And on the bottom left-hand corner, it tells you to select walls to place the wall foundation under. So pretty simple setup. Just click on walls where you need a foundation and you see it pop up. If you need to select multiple walls, you can click on multiple and do like a crossing window like this and hit finish and it'll add them everywhere. However, let's take a look at the functionality that this tool gives us. So if I select one of these foundation elements, I can see that I got some endpoints, some nodes that allows me to pull it out. If I go to the properties, while I still have it selected, I go over to the properties palette. I get this option for eccentricity, which is basically how off-center of the wall do I want this foundation element to be. So if I type in 1 foot here, you can see it's pulling it off. If I want it inside of the building by 1 foot, I would hit -1 foot and it would push everything inside. Okay, so that's cool, right? We're just figuring out what we got. Let's put this back to 0. Now let's go to the type properties. And it looks like we have, materials, what kind of usage it is, and some dimensions. So that's our functionality. Let's talk about what we can't do. When we select the tool, if I hit escape and we go to structure and reselect the tool, remember at the bottom left-hand corner, it is specifically asking you to select a wall. That right away is limiting our options for placement. So this is where we're going to start thinking outside of the box, and we're going to start using elements from different categories to make our life in Revit easier. So go ahead and download that under the download families from this video. There's going to be a nice little package, a zip file of a couple of foundation families. We're only going to work with one of them, so let's go ahead and load those in. So the way we do that is we go to the Insert tab and look for Load Family. And now let's navigate to those foundation families after you download them, and we're going to work with continuous footing. Okay, you can bring them all in if you'd like, but that's for this video, that's what we're going to work with. So after it comes in, nothing happens. All right, you have brought that family into your world. It's ready for usage. Now, make sure that you are active in the Project Browser palette, and this is sort of what your view should look like. If you go to Families and open this tree, and now let's open Structural Framing. You can see there that we got continuous footing, which is the element that we brought in, that we loaded in. So if I open that tree, looks like I have 2 available types. It's just defaults. You guys can create and rename as you see fit, but you can tell by the naming what we're trying to convey, where it happens, and the dimensions of this element. So WF1 is wall foundation 1. If there's another size that you need to create for a wall foundation, feel free to duplicate and go WF2 with the new dimension. But why structural framing category? Why use beams for foundations? Well, now let's compare the functionality that we're looking for. The structural foundation tool, which we currently use to model this foundation element, it's limited. It doesn't allow us to open this family and do anything with it. The reason why we know that is that if I select this family and go back to the Properties palette and hit this Edit Type button here, Revit is communicating back to me and it's telling me what kind of family it is. It's a system family. What a system family is a family that only lives in this file. I can't save this family out of this file to a library on my computer or to a server for other people to use. It has to live here. So with that, I can't edit the family. I can't open to see how it's built. I can't add 2D rebar. this family hinders me later when you become super fluent in Revit and you just want to go and model. Now, what kind of functionality does structural framing give us? So let's hit escape a couple of times. On my palette, I'm going to go to my project browser, and under my structural framing, I'm going to drag and drop WF1. Drag and drop. So you can see a couple of things happened. Because that is a structural framing member, when I dragged and dropped it into my Revit window, all it did was activate the beam tool. It's the same thing as going to your structure tab and hitting beam. Right? I hit beam and same thing happens. So if I go over to my properties palette, you can see that it remembered what I had previously dragged and dropped. So I want you guys to know that because there's a bunch of different ways of accessing the same tool. So I'm going to go about the way of dragging and dropping. Okay. So in my project browser, I have the family that I want to use. I'm going to drag and drop. And now look at all these options that we have available. I get to just draw a good old line. I get to do arcs. I get to do fillets. I can, use the spline tool, which is a bunch of crazy points, as you guys can see here in the video. And I can use this pick lines option. Okay, so it gives us a lot more functionality. So what we're going to do is we're going to delete these structural foundation elements that we put in. We're going to use a structural beam for that. So I'm going to hit escape twice, select one of these structural foundations, type in SA for select all, or right click on one of them and hit select all instances in the entire project. And if I zoom out, you can see that they all highlighted. So let's just delete them. And now that we have no foundations in place, I'm going to drag and drop WF1. And now let's use this pick lines option. And please try to work now in your 3D view. We have enough elements here where we can actually work here. Okay, so I have this beam selected. I've chosen the tool that I want to use to place the beam. And I'm going to select this bottom edge. I'm going to hover over the wall and click. It's not quite what I wanted. You see where Revit put the beam? That's because there's one little checkbox that will save your life. Right here on the options bar, I'm still active in my tool. There's this little 3D snapping button. Okay? I want this foundation to go to the bottom of the wall. But because I did not select 3D snapping, Revit assumed that I wanted that beam, that foundation element, to come in at level 1. So that 3D snapping checkbox overrides this placement plane. Okay? So let's redo that. Let's hit escape a couple of times and let's delete this foundation element. Delete. I will drag and drop WF1 again. I want to use my pick lines or pick edges. And this time I'm going to select 3D snapping. And now when I hover over, you see that the actual edge highlights as opposed to the entire face. So let's uncheck 3D snapping and let's hover over that edge. Look what highlights. You see that the entire face highlights, but it gives you a little hidden line. So watch. You see that hidden line that pops up? That's Revit communicating to you. Hey, this is where I'm going to put that beam. Is that what you want? We don't want that. We want the beam down low. So let's hit 3D snapping, hover over, and click. And Revit put it down there. Okay? So let's just add them to these 3 walls. I'm just selecting the bottom outside edge. Okay? And now let's just work with these elements here. Okay? So I'm going to orbit in a way that I can do a crossing window like this around just those elements, because this is all I want to work with. And I'm going to isolate element. So let's go down your bifocals and hit isolate element. So this is the only thing that we're working with. Okay. So remember when we used the structural foundation tool, it gave you a bunch of options, right? Eccentricity was one of them. Well, the structural foundation tool automatically centers the foundation on the center of the wall. But with a beam tool, Revit takes it very literal. The edge that we selected, that is the center of the beam, foundation, in relation to the edge that we selected. So if we want this foundation to be centered on the wall, we have to find a way to align them. That's where I will go to a plan view to do that. So on your project browser, let's come up to our level 1 plan view. Let's zoom in to the bottom. This is where we have those foundation tools. Let me do a window tile, WT. And over here in 3D, I'm going to do a zoom extents, ZE, so I can see, right? I recommend you always keep a 3D view open when you're modeling, so you can see exactly what you're modifying, okay? Now let's click in level 1, so we're active in this view. And let me just change some lines around. There's a lot going on here. You can see that I can see faces. I can see shading. That's because these materials that I have set up, the materials have been set up. So in your template, if you're using your own template, it may or may not look like this. So to turn that off, this is a surface pattern. Remember, I used the keyword off, visibility graphics. So VG. Now let's look for floors. And I'm going to look for projection, surface, the pattern column, hit override, and I'll just turn these off. Let me just hit apply and pull this off. I want this to go away because that's a floor. Let's hit apply. Okay, that worked. So because we use the structural framing category to place those beams, that is the category that we need to modify if we don't want to see that surface pattern. So now let's go to structural framing here. There we go. Projection, surface, patterns column, hit override, and uncheck these visible boxes. All right. So now you can see that they are off center, right? So here it's pretty simple. Let's go to our modify panel or modify tab. Now let's look for our align tool. We select our destination first. So hover over the center of the wall. You see the hidden line? And now just hover over the beam. You see you can hover over anywhere on the beam. As long as it's not on an edge, you see that the middle highlights. That's what we want to align. So just click on the beam and it'll move, and go ahead and do the same thing everywhere else. Make sure that your multiple alignment is not selected. Revit remembers every little thing that you do. So be careful and look at all the options before you go on and continue working. So I'll do the middle here, middle and edge, and middle and edge. Okay? And now you can extend these out based on whatever your requirement for your company is. All right? But the beauty of using a beam or the beam category for line-based foundation tools, what I mean by line-based is there's two endpoints here, is that you can treat it like a line. So let's just say that this is actually offset by 3 feet. Like the edge of this beam keeps going 3 feet beyond the edge of the wall. You can just draw a line, annotate, detail line. You let the default be draw a line. But then here on the offset, we type in 3 feet, and we find the end of the wall, and we just draw from right to left. We have a 2D line. It's not a model element, it's just 2D. And now I can trim, use my trim tool. So modify, trim, extend multiple, and now I can select that line and I can trim these beams over. Okay, and you can see that the 3D updated. All right? So those are just some perks of using beams for foundations. As we keep populating this model, you'll see all the other perks that come with it. But for now, it allows us to have more functionality, more flexibility over our model. Now, the flip side of this is, if this wall were to change, let's just say the base of that wall changed because the engineer decided that's what it needed to be, you now need to find a way to modify this, whether that's using alignments, placing a new one. So instead of the foundation automatically going with it because we're not using that tool, the Revit out of the box tool, we are using the beam tool because later down the road, it's going to give us a lot more functionality that the structural foundation tool could not.